With each passing day, we get something new revealed about the Netflix adaptation of Avatar The Last Airbender, and today has given us no shortage of news. In today's video, we are going to discuss the brand new IGN article that was released for an interview with the showrunner of the Netflix adaptation. There were some big and small things revealed in this interview, and so we are going to talk about all of it today. My fellow benders of all four nations, welcome to Uncle Iroh's Tea Shop, the Jasmine Dragon. Find yourself a seat, grab some jasmine tea, and enjoy the video. With my most recent videos, give this one a like, and let's see if we can hit a goal of 100 likes. Alright, so we're going to not waste any time here, so let's just jump right into the article from beginning to end, where I did find a lot of points that I did want to delve into. The beginning is an interesting start, as the interviewer asked both Albert Kim and Jabbar Riasani how they managed to get into making this show. Jabbar's answer is pretty simple, in the sense that he grew up with the show, but Albert says that he was inspired by his daughter, and so he sat down and watched the entire show with his kid, and that ultimately led him to making this. I found that to be a pretty sweet story when you can be inspired by someone who you know is meant to watch a show like Avatar, because after all, it is a kid show, even if it's a show that can be consumed by people of all ages and demographics. He even talks about how his son was a hardcore fan and that he didn't know if he wanted him to do it or not, but he won him over in the end, and so I like that there is an element to this for the showrunner that is very important to his kids. In another portion, Albert Kim alludes to the fact that this particular adaptation is meant to be seen as a remix as opposed to a cover, so he's basically using music terms to describe it. A remix is just taking a song and adding onto it and changing it around. He talks about, with some examples, how he wanted to add into the genocide on the Southern Air Temple and the Agni Kai between Ozai and Zuko. He wanted to add them in to make the show feel more grounded. They also spoke to the idea around how that worked out from a visual effects perspective, and that they really did try to pull from a lot of the different scenes that came from the animated show. So to this point, I do want to speak to something that I think I've spoken to already before on this channel, but I want to reiterate it here in this video. It is very obvious that Netflix and the people making the show are taking heavy inspiration from what another adaptation did in The Last of Us from HBO Max. If anybody here watched that adaptation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The Last of Us adapted the game and did a lot of the same things, but it also added in some new stuff that wasn't even in the game beforehand. The biggest example of this, to base it off what some of the quotes that I just read off is how the show begins. They are very explicit on the fact that they are beginning the show completely different with the air nomad genocide at the Southern Air Temple. This is not how the cartoon began, and to that point, to compare this to The Last of Us adaptation starts with a news broadcast, which is not how the original game began either. It was basically like something to, I think, set the tone of what was going to be going forward in the show. In that case, I guess you could say that there is going to be a huge emphasis on making the show more mature and having a lot more darker themes to it. I mean, after all, they are going to show off an entire genocide of a people, and that is what they're going to do, and so I feel like that's how it connects in with those darker themes. Another portion of this that came after talked about how they tackled the themes and tones of the show. It seems that Albert Kim and everybody who worked on the show understood that there was going to be an insane task given to them in how to juggle and handle all these different tones. They understand that it had to have had that silly and comedic tone to it, but also they wanted to delve more into those mature and darker themes as well, to kind of give it an appeal to, say, fans of a show like Game of Thrones. Now, this is very interesting to read from, because from a certain perspective, I can understand what they are going for here, given the fact that it is an 8-episode, tightly compacted drama that is not going to do everything that the original cartoon did. I think a lot of people have to go into this adaptation understanding that the cartoon is simply just going to have many moments that are not going to be translated into the live action. It is a very tough task to ask for a filmmaker and all the people who worked on the show to be able to try their best to get every moment down. Because I think it just based off how I've read how Albert Kim, for example, has talked about the show, I think he would really love to adapt as much as he could, but again, given the factors around a show like this, it is simply just not possible. At the end of the day though, the thing that I love to read from when looking at stuff like this is that I know that the original cartoon is still there and forever will be there, and so I can have both of these versions there for me to watch and love depending on what the quality is going to be for this particular adaptation. There is a portion of the article that speaks to the whole Fire Nation plotline with regards to those characters. They talk about the fact that they brought in Azula and Ozai even though they are not technically supposed to be there, and that it was only meant to be done to help enrich the story and put forth a bigger look onto what that whole life was like for those characters when they didn't see them in the original. So again, this is something that we already had an understanding from, and also again, this is taking the Last of Us approach for me. They are trying to adapt characters in a way to where they can really add more to them than what was already given to them from the original cartoon. So again, Azula and Ozai were not in book 1, but here they want to give them more. Given that a lot of hardcore fans already know the storyline between these characters, I don't feel like I have any issue with them trying to do something different here. I thought it worked really well in the Last of Us adaptation, and so I'll be curious to see if they are managing to make it work on this show as well. They did mention that it was a challenge to adapt this kind of thing as well, considering the cartoon is an adventure of the week style show, whereas this is more so going to be a serialized drama. They even speak specifically to the point that they knew they had to mix together specific plot lines in certain episodes. So, for example, given what we have seen already, I think a lot of people can notice that the Northern Air Temple arc at the end of Book 1 is going to be mashed together with the Omashu arc at the beginning of the season. We see characters like Teo and the Mechanist in Omashu from the looks of it. So that is an example to what the showrunners are speaking to with regards to that notion, because again, this is an 8-episode show and not 22 episodes, so they have to mix stuff together. But again, we already knew that this was going to be the case here, and it feels like they just confirmed it in writing for everybody to see. I also really love how the showrunners delved into the conversation about how to translate bending into the show. They talk about how waterbending and airbending in particular were the most challenging forms of bending to translate. From a certain perspective, they talk heavily on the notion that there was an insane amount of attention to detail when correlating it into the action scenes. How, for example, they would always lean on the environment, and that if they were in a place that was wet, the airbending, for example, picks up some of the water, so you can get a little bit of a specularity into what that water is doing. They mentioned how firebending was the easiest, and yet, funny enough, I found there to be no mention of earthbending here in this interview, which is not that much of an issue to think about considering we've only seen a little bit of earthbending so far. I would say that earthbending showcases itself in Book 1 the least of the 4 types of bending. We know that there's going to be the whole thing with Boomy and Aang, so there will be a lot of earthbending there in that particular sequence. Funny enough, I happen to have looked back on the original show to research this, but there really aren't a lot of instances of earthbending in the first book, to be clear. If you really look back on it, there are 3 episodes out of the 22-episode season in Book 1 where earthbending is prominent. The other funny thing about that is I don't even know if they are going to adapt any of those 3 episodes as heavily. We know that they are adapting Omashu, but we have still yet to see if they are going to adapt the whole plot line with Haru or the plot line in the Great Divide between the 2 feuding refugee groups where their guide was an earthbender. If I had to take a stab at it, I would say that these 2 episodes won't be adapted, given that we have also not seen any casting announcements for a character like Haru. The Great Divide, also for as fun of an episode that it is not entirely important to the overall nature of what an 8-episode show would be like for this particular IP. Again, we also have to talk about this point as to what translates from animated to live action from the perspective of also understanding that it could be seen as filler and not filler. And this is coming from somebody who thinks that the term filler is overly used nowadays and not a lot of people understand its true meaning. One of the more recent shows where I came to find that this term was overly used in just ridiculous ways was the Bad Batch for Star Wars. I really enjoy that show, and I never thought a single episode was ever filler because it always focused on the main characters that the show is titled after and developed them. I think to some degree the original cartoon for Avatar does the same. However, I will also acknowledge that the show does have some filler episodes, but not everything is. So again, there is a fine line between what they are trying to adapt and what they won't in terms of importance versus just adding something in for the sake of it that doesn't help the story. To get back to the article, I really like at one point that they talk about the whole idea of stunts and that a lot of the cast was able to do a lot of it themselves. That kind of stuff is really cool, and given the details behind the background of some of these actors, I think you found a great choice in some of these actors to pick from to play these characters given what kinds of stunts that they would be participating in. It sounds like they put in a lot of work to get this done with these 6-month-long boot camps and whatnot, and so that stuff is stuff that I really like to see. It's kind of like comparing it to Tom Cruise, who we all know is the guy who does every single one of his stunts. There is also a portion of the article that speaks to how they tried to translate Appa and Momo into live action. Personally, I don't know about you all, but I wish that we did get more around these 2 characters. I mean that in the sense that those 2 characters are really important to the original in terms of being a part of the main gang, and it doesn't feel like a lot of people are giving them enough love in terms of promoting them as a part of the main gang for this particular adaptation. So when I read this article and I saw that they talked heavily into making sure that they got it right and studied it hard, that really did warm my heart. Everybody loves Appa and Momo. They are some of the heartbeats to the show that everybody could really feel connected to. And I think the CGI so far looks decent on them both, but what I do like is that the showrunners talk heavily with how they wanted to make it look right. Obviously, the movie adaptation that shall not be named did not really do the best when giving Appa his look, and so when I see this Netflix version, it feels a lot more closer to what I would have imagined it would have looked like in live action. To me, though, with these characters, you really have to nail down the connection that they have with the main gang. Again, everybody loved them, and that tone has to be connected beautifully between them together. They have to be able to sell that well, especially given where a character like Appa, for example, goes in Book 2 for those who know. Also, while we are on the topic, if we ever get to this point, I really wonder if they are going to adapt the one episode in Book 3 where Aang is having trouble getting to sleep before the invasion of the Fire Nation, where he is hallucinating and he sees Appa and Momo fighting each other while speaking human language. To this day, that is maybe my second favorite in all of the original cartoon in terms of the humor and how much of a fun time that was to watch. It is so wacky and so weird to the point where I almost am a little worried that it won't get translated because, again, if you think about it hard enough, that would be so weird to look at in live action. But I digress. We'll get to that point in a couple of years when a season 3 comes. At one point, they did also talk about how they were going to translate the Avatar state into live action, and this got me curious because the showrunners speak to the fact that they ended up tweaking a little bit of what it would look like to go into the Avatar state. And again, given that this is live action, I can understand where they're coming from because you do have to make it look like he is actually going into a state of mind that makes him his all-powerful being in every way. And this is based off the fact that Aang does go into the spirit world and the Avatar state many times in Book 1, and so I'll be curious to see how many times they do it in live action. I mean, he's basically in that state for the first 3 episodes of the cartoon at points, so again, we'll have to wait and see what they do. As we get near the end of the article and interview, they mentioned what it was like to translate the cartoon to live action in terms of connecting it from going from point A to point B. They talk about how they had nailed it down, that Aang needed to understand that he had to get to a certain place by the end of the season, and so in this case, that would be the Northern Water Tribe, and that any detour that he goes on would basically take away from the story of that particular trajectory. So basically they talk about the fact they are not going to be translating the elephant koi portion of the Kyoshi arc, for example. As unfortunate as it is given why that scene is in the original in the first place, I can understand from a budgetary perspective and a main storyline perspective why they wanted to include it. I mean, let's be real here, the elephant koi is going to be ridiculous in terms of CGI. That thing in the original cartoon is ginormous, and again, given the circumstances of that particular part of the episode where Aang wanted to have fun but also impress Katara, I can understand where the showrunners are going with from that point of view. Other than that, that is all pretty much that I wanted to speak to with regards to the article, at least that I took as a point of note with importance. I'll be curious to see how all your thoughts would be like down below in the comments if you guys got a chance to read the article yourself. Again, there is a link to it in my description for those wondering. Again, give me all your thoughts down below, given how much was revealed in this article, and then also speak to my commentary on it if you agree or disagree. Let me know, and also please do that respectfully. I have had a few people come into my comments with a goal in mind to not be very respectful, and so I just want you guys all to have a conversation with me regardless where we stand in a way that is understandable between both parties. Other than that, again, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new here, and turn on that notification bell for whenever I upload in the future. On your way out of Uncle Iroh's tea shop, be sure to let him know how much you appreciate his jasmine tea and his words of wisdom that come with it. I hope everyone here has a wonderful rest of the day and a good weekend, and I will see you all soon for more Avatar.